Hey, what's up, everyone? I wanted to talk about InQuest Gamer 145 today from May 2007. Not to do a full-scale review, which I will do later, as I will do with all 170 odd or so non-Star Wars game magazines that nonetheless contain original EU content in the form of RPG scenarios. But I wanted to talk about this today to help answer a question that I get from time to time about the cost and the time and the effort it takes to track all of these magazines down. Is it worth it? If you're an EU completist, if you want to know everything that happened in the EU, is it worth tracking these things down? Well, you could Google hard enough and find probably digital copies of these things for free. But if you are not just a completist, but someone who wants the physical archive, believe me, I sympathize. Is it worth tracking these down? Well, again, if you're a completist, if you've entertained the notion at all, then the answer is probably yes. But specifically, what should you expect to find? Is it going to be multi-page spreads with earth-shattering consequences for EU lore? Not really. Are you going to find a lot of really cool things? In many cases, new characters, new vehicles, new illustrations with really striking parallels to things that happen elsewhere in the EU? Yeah, you are. But just to use this as an example, are you also going to find things that are only a couple paragraphs long? Yeah. So InQuest 145, as a quick aside, is one of about 10 InQuest Gamer magazines with Star Wars EU content in the form of RPG scenarios, again, original EU scenarios. Most InQuest Gamers had some content about Star Wars, but there's only about 10 that have some new original EU contribution. But again, it's the last one to line, happens to be kind of hard to find. So again, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes money to track these things down, and this is what you get. Now again, it's more EU, and that's all that matters, right? So it's worth it, but don't expect much. I mean, again, even on a 2-page spread with Star Wars information, it's only about a quarter. It's only about a quarter of that, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, here you got price guides, as you had in many InQuest Gamers. This happens to relate to the different Wizards of the Coast miniature game sets that were out at the time. You've got information over here about some of those game sets and figures that are compatible. And then there's this, and this is the odd trio. And again, I'm not going to do a full-scale review, but again, just wanted to sort of give folks a sense of what we sometimes talk about when we talk about non-Star Wars magazines containing EU content. Really briefly, it's the odd trio. It's C-3PO and Chewbacca and Boba Fett, and they team up. Why? To protect themselves. There happens to be a killer squad coming after Boba Fett. For some reason, coincidentally, once again, C-3PO finds himself blasted into pieces, and coincidentally, Chewie's there to pick up the pieces. Chewie throws him on his back, which in this scenario happens to be a tactical advantage because Chewie now has effectively eyes in the back of his head. And teaming up with Boba Fett, you get to sort of run them through this scenario to help save their necks, right? And this is not something that's implausible. We know throughout the EU from time to time, Boba Fett teams up with the good guys for all sorts of reasons. This is the odd trio. There's some tactical information here about sort of how to use this, how best to use this, how best to understand this scenario, with some very, very general information about sort of, again, what's happening and how to sort of plug it into your Wizards of the Coast miniature game scenarios. It's written by Sterling Hershey. He's not attributed here, but we know it's written by Sterling Hershey, who is a prolific Star Wars EU RPG creator. So it's got that going for it. Again, this is not going to sort of, there's nothing here that contradicts sort of existing lore. The only frustrating thing with this, with many RPG EU scenarios, indeed even with various elements of the EU, is that there's very little specifics in the way of explaining where precisely this fits in the timeline. Instead, what this lets us know is that at some point in the EU, this scenario occurs. At some point in the EU, C-3PO and Chewbacca once again find themselves in a position where Chewie has to carry a broken bit, of C-3PO all around his back, and they happen to team up with Boba Fett. Now, okay, there are some things you can do to narrow this down. Okay, so it's got Boba Fett, so it doesn't take place before, at least some point at which he's adopted this, persona, right? He's grown up, presumably. So, okay, again, at the minimum, this doesn't take place at least before a certain point in the prequel era. And it's got Chewbacca, so to be blunt, it doesn't take place after Vector Prime, right? And that's still a big swath of time. But again, the challenge with some EU is that it's so vast, and there are so many very tiny, specific little instances of things we know happened, but we don't know where they go. It's kind of becomes part of one of the fun debates you just have to have about where to sort of stick it on the timeline. So be it. At least we know that at some point this occurred, and that's at least something, right? That's more than we would have known without the existence of this story, this magazine. So again, Star Wars Gamer 145, or sorry, Star Wars InQuest Gamer 1, or not, it's not Star Wars, that's the whole point. InQuest Gamer 145, one of many, many, many magazines without Star Wars on the title, yet which nonetheless contain EU scenarios. So next time you're wondering whether or not Chewie and C-3PO and Boba Fett ever teamed up in this particular way, now you know they did, and you only found out because of this magazine. So is it worth the effort to track down? Again, this depends on your, collecting habits, but don't be surprised if this is all you get. And by the way, I've seen a number of these magazines with much less in the way of content. I think it's Wizard magazine issue, God, what is it? Is it 100? It's the one that came out sometime in 2000. There's basically a paragraph about Darth Maul, which at the time was pretty novel because it clarified some things we didn't know about him that we do now. It almost feels slightly sort of moot to sort of pick it up, but again, it's important sort of for the time. It was something that we were learning about the character, which at that point was still only about a year old. That was sort of novel. So it's one reason to pick that up, because again, there's some sort of in-universe sort of clarifications about him and his species. It's cool, right? But again, it's a paragraph. It's sort of a blink and you'll miss it sort of EU contribution, right? So a lot of work's gone into developing basically the full list of these magazines to track down. Again, as I say, there's about 170 or so. I'm always happy to share it with folks. And if there's ever anything out there that you think actually qualifies, let me know. It's a growing list. It's taken a worldwide body of people sort of having read these magazines for years, having collected these magazines for years, to sort of narrow down to sort of say, well, look, we've got the full run of InQuest Gamer, and so we know these maybe say something about Star Wars in the way of previews or reviews, but they don't have something about a scenario or EU content, but these do, right? And so it's been tricky, but it's been worth the effort. So InQuest Gamer 145, one of many, many additional contributions to the EU, however minute and however sort of general. And again, it is admittedly frustrating to find out that this happens, but you don't know precisely where or when. But again, we know it did happen thanks to this.